Hello, my name is Sandy Adamitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey writers, it's Sandy. We have a terrific show for you today. As promised, for January, we are going to do a series of interviews with Page Awards winners. First up is R. Scott Shields, who won the Page Bronze Prize in 2009 for his beautifully written family drama, Strawberry Mansions, and then won our grand prize the very next year in 2010 for his comedy feature, Supercat. Since then, sometimes with representation and sometimes without, Scott went on to write a sci-fi fantasy for Hydraulics Entertainment called Jason and the Astronauts, and was hired to write 2 sports biopics. Writers, are you ready? Let's hang out with Scott. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
My pleasure.
Did you do anything special for New Year's?
For New Year's, I swept rain off of my back patio from one side to the other because I had clogged drains. I was literally drenched. I had to change clothes when I was done. I really rang in the new year in style.
Scott, let's start with Jason and the Astronauts. Is that one of the scripts you got without a rep?
Well, the script that I wrote for Hydraulics, I got that job without representation. Fortunately, I knew the principals at Hydraulics because they are visual effects wizards, and I have a background in visual effects. Before I was writing, I was a coordinator and a producer of visual effects for features and TV. So when I had a few scripts under my belt, I was trying to get as many people as possible to read them. And the guys at Hydraulics were some of the people I called upon. And they really sparked to one of my scripts, but it wasn't for them. But they had a script that they were developing internally that they thought if I brought my style of writing to the concept that they wanted to develop, we might have something. So I got that before I had any representation, but I actually obtained representation while I was negotiating that deal. And that came in very handy because I didn't know what I was doing if I was trying to do my own deal. I'm sure I would have agreed to all the wrong things. So it was really good to have people on my side, but I did obtain the assignment all on my own.
I've been in the business quite a number of years, and I've seen many special effects. They're usually guys, kind of approach my boss, who was a showrunner at the time. And I have never seen the crossover happen. I've always seen special effects, wanting to break over to the other side, and you did. I got to say, that really must be a tribute to your talent. It's hard in this business to be in one part of the business, editing, special effects, and break through to the other side. Bravo.
Yeah, thank you. People tend to define you by what they see you doing. So oftentimes I found that I didn't want to highlight that I had done visual effects and was actively doing visual effects work while I was writing, just because people kind of roll their eyes and say, oh, you're not really a writer. You're a guy doing it just as a hobby. And they pat you on the head and say, good job. It's a fine line to walk, calling in favors to have people read your script, because ultimately that's a very, very hard thing to get people who are in a position to help you actually read the script. But I called in that favor with the guys at Hydraulics, and it worked out. In fact, when I was offered the assignment to write, I had my head so wrapped around the thought that they were going to make me an offer for the spec script that I had written, that they read, that they enjoyed, that I didn't realize they were offering me a writing assignment until I kind of left the meeting. My head was spinning so much because I was trying to sell my script I wrote. And I realized as I'm walking out, wait a minute, I think I just got a paid assignment. And my disappointment went away when I realized that it all worked out in the end.
What do you think? Do you think today it's a bit different people who create content, they're doing so much on their own. They're editing, they're doing sound, doing social media they're on YouTube. Do you think it's easier to walk in a door nowadays having skills and being taken seriously from back in the day when perhaps an editor or post-production person didn't get respect?
Well, I wish I could give an answer to that. I would say that, the more tools in your toolkit, the more valuable you're going to be. But ultimately, you've got to be a good storyteller to be a good writer. If you have mastery of those tools and you can use them and put together, a sizzle reel or something that somebody can look at and digest in just a minute or two, and you've passed along the feeling of what it is you're trying to sell or you want to make, then absolutely it's very realistic that you could make a convincing pitch to someone if you have something to actually show them. The flip side to that is if you don't make something that looks good, then it's gonna bomb. Sometimes they're better off leaving something to the imagination of the person you're pitching to, because in their mind they might be building their perfect version of your project, and you don't want to do anything to disturb that fragile balance. To answer your question, yeah, it's a very good, effective way to convey your messages if you can make some kind of low cost content, whether it's just something you bring in special to them or you put it on YouTube or the other methods.
I've noticed writers are talking about pitch decks. Now, what do you think of pitch decks?
I avoid them. I am just a slave to the written word. I prefer so much it's harder for me to write the promotional materials than it is to write a full script. I will slave over one sentence in a log line or one sentence in a synopsis longer than I will slave over an entire act of a feature, because I just feel like you have to make that one sentence perfect, and it's really hard. And so that's why it gets under my skin. It drives me nuts because I just can't find the perfect way to do it. And I think I find the perfect way to do it one day, and I look at it the next day and it's horrible. So
exactly.
It really scares me to do that.
I like the old timey way of go, pitch, leave behind maybe a page. And I know there's a lot of nervous people who go, well, that person has to pitch to the higher ups. And, I don't know how they're going to pitch. But many things, many things have been made with just a leave behind as the first step. And you don't even have to leave a leave behind.
I wish I could speak as an expert on that. I've done pitch meetings that worked. I've done pitch meetings that didn't work. At the end of the day, I will do whatever I have to do to convey my thought to the person on the other side of the table. I don't have representation right now, but when I've had representation, my standing order to them was just get me in the room. And I will, if there's a connection that I can make with the person who I'm talking to, then I'll try to make that connection. That's, to me, those kind of relationships are the most valuable thing. They may not buy what I'm selling that day, whatever story I'm pitching or a couple of stories I'm pitching, but more valuable than that is the relationship that I could potentially build with them. So just get me in the room and I'll do it. I'll do the rest.
Yeah, I really like that. You've written 2 biopics for sports figures. Can you tell me about the projects? And did one lead to another?
Yeah, I'll start in order. I wrote in 2014, I believe it was, a biopic about Oscar Schmidt, who is a Brazilian basketball star. Most Americans have not heard of Oscar Schmidt, but he is in the Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. He never played a day in the NBA, although he was offered a no-cut contract. He is considered the highest scoring player in the history of the game of basketball. He played from when he was in his teen years till he retired when he was 45 years old.
I had no idea. The highest scoring?
Most Americans don't. In fact, Kobe Bryant was a huge fan of Oscar's because Kobe's dad played against Oscar when they played in the Italian leagues. And Kobe was a ball boy, as Oscar tells it, was a ball boy doing rebounding while they were doing warm-ups. And he just loved Oscar's game. Oscar was a guy that was 6 foot, or is 6'8", 6'9", kind of around Larry Bird's height, and just had an uncanny ability to make every shot. If you ever see any footage of him, highlight reels, it is this grainy footage of him just making crazy shots. If he could see the basket from 3-point range, it was going in. So he was really a prototype of what the NBA has kind of become all these years later. You get these tall guys that can make 3-pointers. But back in the 70s and 80s, that really was uncommon. But Oscar kind of blazed that trail and scored at an unbelievable clip. My manager contacted me with a request to find an American screenwriter who knew the game of basketball well, because there just aren't a lot of them in Brazil. And they were imagining this project as a Brazilian project, written and would be spoken in Portuguese, maybe subtitled in English if it were to be distributed here. So, but just because they had a dearth of writers who knew the game of basketball well in Brazil, that's why they came looking for an American screenwriter. My manager at the time represented a lot of Brazilian talent, writers, directors, actors, but very few Americans. And he knew that I was a huge basketball nut. I'm a big sports geek. And so when he brought me the project, I absolutely jumped at it. Within just a few weeks, I was getting my visa and getting on a plane to go to Sao Paulo to meet Oscar and research the project.
Scott, how fun.
He is still the all-time scoring leader in the Olympics in basketball. It was unbelievable to be able to spend that time with a sports legend.
Wow. Scott, my cousin David, who is an avid listener of this podcast, would not forgive me if I did not ask you, are you a fan of the Yukon women basketball team?
Am I a fan of them?
Yeah.
I'm not an anti-fan of them. I'm an Indiana Hoosier.
Say no more. I get it.
So, yeah, we're not rivals. I have a tremendous amount of respect for UConn's program. Both their men and their women's are fantastic programs. Yeah, they're national champs multiple times.
They're terrific. What do you think makes a good biopic? And do you have a favorite biopic that you've watched?
Well, yeah, my favorite biopic, the gold standard for biopics for me is Walk the Line. I love the Johnny Cash story in Walk the Line. I thought they did such an incredible job to get great performances, great storytelling. And the thing that they did so well in that is they showed his warts. They showed, this was not a flattering portrayal of him. I mean, he was not a nice guy in some of those scenes. And as I've been writing biopics, I kind of have to address those same kind of issues as I'm talking to the principals and interviewing them. I've really got to get their trust, because I want to be straightforward with them that this biopic is going to sometimes, it's going to show them winning the big game or winning the big race. But everybody knows that. What the audience doesn't know is those quiet moments of failure and heartbreak and flaws. And the more flaws that we can show, the more the audience is going to understand them as real people instead of just a caricature of a champion. Because everybody knows this movie's about a champion, or at least the ones that I've written here. Everybody knows that you won the big game, you won the big race. What they don't know is what you had to get through to get there. And that's what we have to tell. So what makes a good biopic? To me, it's telling the story that the audience doesn't know. Maybe even their fans don't know, those private moments. And those are sometimes really hard to draw out of people, because like the two guys that I wrote biopics on are both champions of their sports. One is a drag racer and one is a basketball player. And they are seasoned in the art of the interview. And they know, they've repeated their stories so many times, they have them down cold. And those are the stories of their victories. And that's not what I'm as interested in. I can find that stuff out real easy. I need those rough moments.
Scott, I find that so interesting. Are you able to directly say that to the subject, or do you have to craft it? I'm sure maybe it's subjective, but how did you handle that? How did you learn how to crack your subject?
Well, in order, because I've only done two of these. The first time I did it, I'd never written a biopic. And so I kind of went into that process just with a list of questions that I wanted to know. And I discovered as I went what the guardrails were and what the sort of protection measures that he was putting up to kind of deflect me from getting into the areas that I was probing him on. And so I was discovering how to do it as I went the first time I wrote a biopic. And it took hours of kind of talking with Oscar before he began to trust me and revealed some information. And as I was interviewing other people around him, once the trust was built up and I let him know that, I'm not a newspaper reporter doing an expose, I'm a storyteller and you're going to see this story. I just want to make sure that I'm telling a real version of you, not just a one-dimensional version of you. And once I learned from that process of doing that first feature script, that first biopic, when I went into the second one with John Force, I was very upfront because I kind of knew that this was going to play out the same way. So I spelled it out from the very first meeting. And I said, the more flawed you are, the better this story is going to be. And John, he's a real character. He responded and said, well, we're going to have one hell of a story then, because he's very upfront. He embraces his flaws. He's an amazing guy with a zillion stories to tell, and he's not afraid to be in the punchline in those stories. That relationship worked out well, but I brought that up very early in our relationship, and he embraced it.
Did you have to do a lot of research about car racing for that? Were you familiar?
I didn't know anything about drag racing when I went into my meeting with them, so I had to research a ton of it. Now it was almost embarrassing. I was sitting in his headquarters, which is a massive building with old race cars, new race cars, cutting edge technology. And it's a family business. And his daughter, Ashley Force, she was the head of development, as well as being a former race car driver herself.
Yes.
And I had to ask her just the most basic questions about drag racing, like, how fast are you going there? And she said, oh, the car sputtered out. It blew out. It was only going about 100 miles an hour. And I said, that was 100 miles an hour? That looked like it was going 5 miles an hour. And she said, well, if it had kept going, it would have been 300 miles an hour about a half second later. So my head sort of spun around, and I had to learn the ins and outs of the sport because I had to, write the technical details into the script. But I'll tell you, learning those kind of things are pretty easy. The hardest part when researching it is getting the authenticity, the flavor of the dialogue and just what life is like in the pits at the races, much more than any technical aspect. The technical aspects, those can be fine-tuned here and there, but to have an authentic voice of what it's like when the pressure's on and there's money on the line and the fans are restless, the tension of the moment, those are the things that have to be super authentic to sell the story.
I agree 100%. Did you have trouble maybe putting too much in the script and had to pull back, and how does that work? Do you just know instinctively that maybe you've gone too far, or do you have someone you trust to read for you?
Well, that's the Force script. My first draft was 180 plus pages. It was outrageously long, and I knew it was too long, but I just wanted to have a starting point.
Yes.
And it was very, very difficult to whittle that down to 120 pages. But I did. We eventually got there. Fortunately, I was working with their production team, with Ashley Force, on that. And she was a fantastic sounding board to read everything I wrote. And we'd discuss what was important, what maybe we could throw overboard, save for later if we need to. But having that working relationship was great so that I wasn't just making these unilateral decisions that in some cases, when you're doing those things by yourself, they seem good to you, but boy, you can really use an extra set of eyes on it. And I love to collaborate with a development person when I can. And she provided some really valuable second opinions when I wasn't sure if I was making the right call.
Do you like the development process?
Yes. When I'm writing by myself, The great thing is I can do anything I want. I can write any script I want. I can change the genre midstream if I want. I can take as long as I want. But I do prefer working with someone because that collaboration, ultimately filmmaking is a very collaborative process. And so having that collaboration from the outset can help you from taking the wrong turns that you might spend years toiling on something or shelving something that shouldn't be shelved. If somebody can offer you some insight and say, no, you've only got a couple little things here. Have you thought of this? Have you thought of changing this character to something else or combining these two characters? Just that fresh perspective can offer you so much. So I crave that kind of collaboration.
What is your relationship with notes from the development aspect of things? Were you always, like, hey, give me notes, I love them? Or did you have to learn to find the note behind the notes? What do you do with a note that you don't agree with? There's a couple questions in there, Scott.
That's okay. Well, you got to pick your moments. If there's something you're on the fence about, you try it. You try anything. Sometimes you have happy accidents. At first blush, I might get a note that I say, "Oh God, that's a terrible idea." But I've learned to kind of sleep on that, and sometimes they're right. You have to just throw your ego aside and say, this person's coming into this with a fresh perspective. Don't get so hung up on my preconceived notions. So if there is a note that I think somebody has really missed the mark on, that they don't understand the house of cards that are going to come crashing down if I do the note that they put in, then I'll pick that moment to say, spell out the problems that would create. But I would say that's, the vast minority of notes, 95+% notes, I will give my honest best effort to accomplish. And very, very often I find out they are right. So I just remain open to that. It's all part of the process.
You started out writing shorts. What's the benefit of writing shorts?
Well, kind of. I didn't start off writing shorts. That was thrust upon me from my next door neighbor. I had actually already won the Page Awards and had one script assignment. I'd already had one paid assignment when my next door neighbor, who had just moved to town from Texas, he had one independent feature under his belt, one very low budget feature under his belt, and he wanted to make a short. And he said, "Hey, how'd you like to write a short for me?" And I said, "Are you crazy? No way. I write features." And then I thought about it for like 10 minutes and I realized that was a dumb answer. And so I said, no, absolutely. Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. And I'm glad I listened to that second voice, because the benefit of writing shorts is they can actually get made. And that's what happened. And I was really happy with the product. We came up with a short called The Choice that got a pretty good response on the contest circuit. But the most important thing that I got to experience was hearing actors reading my lines, because of all the writing that I'd done and winning the Page Awards and paid assignment, none of that went into production, but the short did. And the director was collaborative enough with me that he included me in the casting process, and I was on set most of the time. It was a fantastic experience to sit in and be able to participate in the casting and listen to the different takes that actors would deliver on my scenes, because I had just never heard that. And some of these were real professional actors. Some of them I'd even seen before. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, "Oh, that's that guy from that commercial," or "That's that person from that movie."
It's amazing when an actor reads your line and it's so good and it's nothing what you meant, the reading that you meant it to be.
I'll tell you one quick story about that. There was one actor that came in. I wish I even remembered his name. And I feel for actors. I'm not an actor. I'll never be an actor. I respect actors. So just let me preface this story with that. But this guy came in and he tanked. He somehow got off of the script and started ad-libbing. And he went full George Costanza with it. He was going to make sure if he bombed, he was going to bomb so big that he changed the entire intent of the scene. He changed the story and just sort of smiled and left when it was done. And I, I respected his commitment to bombing the audition. So bravo to him. I remembered him more than most people. Memorable moment in the casting room that day.
That's so cute. Can you take us back to when you decided to enter the Page Awards? The Page Awards, who sponsors the Writers Hangout, the first deadline is January 10th, and it's coming up. What was that like for you when you entered?
Well, my experience with the contest circuit, which included the Page Awards, was 3 years. I was doing contests in 2008, 9, and 10. The first year in 2008, I couldn't get anybody to read my scripts. It was very frustrating. I thought that I was writing some good stuff. Some of my stuff was, I thought, that's okay, but some of it it exceeded my expectations. But I couldn't get people to read it. And contests made sure that people read it. So I entered. I think that I was pretty late in the cycle, but I did enter the Page Awards that year. And I had 2 scripts that I think advanced to the quarterfinals, but that's as far as they got. And while I thought that was great, I wanted more. And so I touched up a few things and re-entered in 2009. And I entered a bunch of contests, including the Page Awards. And 2009 was a fantastic year for my script, Strawberry Mansion. Strawberry Mansion was a sports drama, a feel-good underdog story. And it advanced and got all the way to the finals and ended up winning a bronze. And I was really, that 2009 was a fork in the road kind of year for me, because I was just not getting the feedback I wanted. And I was considering, boy, do I really want to keep doing this? I'm putting so much time and effort into it. And it was really the contest that saved me. I mean, I got the validation that, hey, I actually am doing a good job. Maybe I should keep putting the effort, because if I hadn't gotten something to kind of make me feel like all that hard work was going somewhere, I might have given up. I don't know. And that the returns came in that year, and it gave me enough motivation to touch up some other scripts that I entered in 2010. I had a different script, different genre, a talking animal comedy called Super Cat that I had written a year prior, but had shelved because I had taken a wrong turn creatively on that script. But I spent a solid month tearing Super Cat apart in the winter of 2009, 2010, and I entered it in the Page Awards, and I felt really, really good about the script, but I didn't think it was a contest darling. Like it's not highbrow enough. It's animals farting and joking, and there's an animal sex scene in it, and it's funny and it's heartwarming at times, but I didn't think it had contest winner written all over it. But I was absolutely shocked that it won the grand prize in 2010.
Yay.
And that was still is a moment that I treasure when that happened. I couldn't believe that with the thousands of entries, high quality entries that the Page Awards gets, that it actually won the grand prize.
Well, speaking on behalf of the Page Awards, I can't imagine a more complimentary thing to say than you were in a fork in the road and that win kept you going. I think that's what Page is. You've got the talent, they want to encourage you and want to get your script out there. And that's very touching. And our listeners are really going to benefit from hearing that.
It's hard for anybody to get people to read your scripts, and those you enter months in advance, and then you just got such a long burn waiting for the feedback. It's wonderful and it's painful at the same time, because you're waiting for that cutoff date, and then the next cutoff date, and the stakes are getting higher. It's just like a movie in itself, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Starting out, what was your biggest misconception about being a working writer?
Well, I don't know if I had any misconceptions, but I would say that things I discovered that I didn't expect to discover is how much organization it takes to write. It's not all just sort of dreamy, sitting at the keyboard and magic comes out the other end. There's so much more analysis of what you've written, because nothing I've written as a first draft is is ready to go anywhere. So you have to get it out there, but then you have to almost have this switch to the other side of your brain or step out of your body for a moment and just be absolutely critical of the material to whittle it down to its finest points, figure out what's working, figure out what isn't. So it's the sort of the analysis phase of it that is painful, but is really effective. The thing I like to liken it to is when you first, or at least when I first imagine a story that I want to write, that version of it, the one that I dreamt up, if we want to say that idealized version, which is not fully fleshed out yet, it's just, I think this story could work. Let's say if I achieve that, I have achieved a score of 100, just my own internal scoring. If I get to that, if everything's on the page the way that I dreamt it up, I'm going for it's going to achieve a score of 100. The first draft and second and maybe third, I might get all the way to 90. And I know, getting to 100 is there is no such thing as perfection in something like this.
Right.
But that last, let's just say there is for the sake of arguments, that last 10% is harder than the first 90. And it takes some really difficult, excruciating, and long-term work to get that last 10% to where you feel like you've delivered what you dreamt up right at the very beginning of the process. So that was something I didn't quite get, is just how much work it takes to get something to a point where you're actually happy with it. You feel like it's achieved the level of success that you dreamt up.
Scott, that was really interesting. I've never quite heard it stated that way, but yes. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions. But before you go, would you like to play a round of brain drops?
No, I'm just kidding. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Brain drops are a list of questions only a writer can answer. And you're going to have 30 seconds. And we're going to see if you can answer 10 questions in 30 seconds.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow.
Okay. I'm going to start the timer, then start the question.
Okay.
When writing, music on or off?
On.
If you're reading a hard copy of a script, 1 Brad or 2?
0.
Whiteboard or legal pad?
Legal pad.
Final draft or Celtics?
Final draft.
Favorite snack while writing?
Donut.
Do you come up with a title for your script at the end or the beginning?
Beginning.
Writing at home, PJs or clothes?
Clothes.
Shaded parking spot right next to set or 25 extra K in the budget?
25 extra K in the budget. Easy.
How do you choose a name of a character?
Friends from high school.
Research or wing it?
Research.
Oh, stop. You're 10 questions out of 14.
Oh, bummer, man.
But you still win in our hearts. Scott, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody at the Page Awards. I love the Page people. They've been so helpful to me. And since I won the Page Awards, they've always been there to answer any questions I have. It's been a wonderful relationship with the Page Awards over these years.
Wonderful. And we love you, Scott. That's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, like, and thrive. Till we get to hang out again, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards. Executive producer, Kristen O'Verne. Producers, Terry Sampson and Sandy Adamitis. Music by Ethan Stoller.